Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. It's so nice that we are able to have these weekly conversations. I am so fond of all of my guests, listeners, and subscribers because none of this would be possible, including the 2023 People's Choice Podcast Award nomination, had it not been for you. And please keep in mind that you can also listen to Should Have Listened to My Mother on YouTube, as well as on all social media platforms, including Simplecast. Edward de Gangi completed his first book, a memoir, in 2020. It's titled The Best Gift Given. It's been described as a jigsaw puzzle. Every story is made up of pieces. Big ones, small ones, pieces not easily found, tiny and hiding essential to complete the picture. We all know what puzzles are like, and indeed, Ed is a bit of a detective. But it's a story set in the 1940s of a courageous woman surrendering her child at birth and overcoming obstacles in order to achieve her dreams. It's the story of loving your parents, adoptive or not, and it's a story with a philosophy of things happen for a reason. Edward, through years of research and asking sensitive questions to people who never knew he existed, has found love and gifts in different ways. The Gift Best Given is a touching memoir about an almost mystical being, his biological mother, and a life with his loving and devoted adoptive parents. Ed de Gangi, welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Jackie, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. That was really very touching.
Well, this pulls at your heartstrings. You started writing this book just prior to turning 70 years old, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. I had known from the time that I was quite young that I was adopted and quite happy in the situation that I was in. I was adopted by wonderful people. That was not an accident. But it wasn't until I was almost 70 years old that I decided to let me go and find out who the woman was who had actually given birth to me. And I started making some very unexpected discoveries along the way.
I bet. And this may turn out to be an idea for another topic or conversation between you and I, because it's the construct or the idea of telling your child that they are adopted from a very early age. And are there pluses and minuses? And the second I say that, I know a lot of people may get very angry with me or will totally understand. But I think that's something that has been weighing in the back of my mind. You just said you knew from a young age that you were adopted.
Yeah, the interesting part, Jackie, is that I have no recollection at all of my adoptive parents ever sitting me down and saying, "You are adopted."
But you think that they did, technically?
Well, I discovered a piece of paper when I was quite young. I found two pieces of paper, quite honestly. One was my amended birth certificate, which essentially showed my adoptive parents as my parents. And the other was a document which I didn't fully understand at the time, but it turned out to be my adoption decree.
Right. So this is what I'm talking about. We might have to have another whole conversation.
I think, interestingly, my mother and I, we're quite close. We had a lovely relationship, and she's been gone for quite some time now, but I very much loved her and knew she loved me. But prior to my getting married, and this now goes back 35, 36 years ago, my mother and my then fiance were together, and my mother was talking about my adoption and said she was told by the doctor to just hold your baby and say, "You're my wonderful, lovely baby, adopted baby, and I love you." Mm. And I think that was the philosophy back then. And I'm sure she did that if that's what she was told to do, but she apparently stopped doing it about the day that I had any memory of her doing it.
Right. Well, and it all seemed to have worked out, nurture versus nature, as long as you have somebody loving you. As a baby has someone loving them, I think that's all that matters. And
I agree with
to
you
some devil is in
100%.
the details. But what is your adoptive mom's name? What was her
My
name?
adoptive mother was Nina, Nina.
Yes, that's one of my sister's names.
Oh, okay, okay.
Wonderful. I love it.
And she came from an immigrant Ukrainian family. She was born here in the United States, but both her parents had immigrated in the 1890s, I would think, somewhere in that area.
And do you have any contact with any of them now? Any
Of my
relatives in
of my
Ukraine?
adoptive relative. Oh,
Yeah.
I have well, I've got two cousins well, I've got a number of cousins still alive. One who I stay in fairly frequent contact with. And I live in North Carolina. She and her husband have just recently moved to South Carolina. So, they were out of that family though. So she was my mother's sister's daughter. And I've got an older male cousin who contact is infrequent but always cordial, and then two other cousins who are basically we've not been in touch in some time.
But they're still in Ukraine.
Oh, no, no,
Oh,
no.
they're all
They're
here.
all in the United States. They were all born in the U.S. and raised in the
Hoping
U.S.
that everyone was safe and sound.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's interesting. We don't ask enough questions
I
of
know.
the people of where we come from. And my guess is there are some distant relatives still there, if not in Ukraine, then in Eastern Poland. But none of us know. I've certainly asked my cousins, and they don't know.
So let me, I want to spell your last name. It's a beautiful Italian name. Edward, I'm referring to you as Ed today, but your big book is authored by Edward de Gangi, which is D-I, and then separate word, Gangi, which is really beautiful. I'm Italian as well. So
Yeah, it's a Sicilian name, and you'll find some people who are very, very vehement about Sicilian and Italian are different things. I always assumed I was Italian.
I'm half Sicilian, so I know
Okay,
exactly
so
what you're talking
you understand.
All right, so wow, we might have to have several conversations, but I want to go back. Can you tell me the gift best given? What does that mean? Or why did you name it that? Of the millions of names that I'm sure you came up with.
Sure. The book that I wrote is interleaved with my memoir about the search for the identity of my birth mother. And then it's interleaved with creative nonfiction, which basically traces my birth mother's life from the time she left home at the age of 17 from New York City and traveled alone by train across the United States to pursue her dream of becoming a professional ice skater and performer. And I know precisely from that time through the time of my birth where she was, who she was with, and essentially what I didn't know was what was said between she and the people that she was with. So I've created some dialogue in there, and in one point she is dealing with confronting the fact that she's unexpectedly pregnant and has to make a decision on what to do, and her options are, one, to keep the child and go home in great shame to her very conservative Roman Catholic Polish family. The other is to give birth and put me in a backpack and take me back out on the road with her and tour. The third is to place me for adoption. And the fourth, she was offered the option of an abortion, which would have been illegal in New York City, certainly in 1948, but would have been done in a hospital setting, so it would have been safe. And she is discussing her decision about what to do, and saying the gift I was given was this wonderful ice skating career I've had, and I don't know what to do about my pregnancy. And the person she's confiding in is basically saying, you were given that gift, but you've also been given another gift. And sometimes the best gift is the one that you give to another. So hence that's where the title, The Gift Best Given, arises. And it implies the gift that she gave to my parents and to myself.
Wow. That is brilliant. It's so complex and there's so many layers in there, which make it even more interesting because I believe you are of the philosophy things happen for a reason based on the research that I did and interviews that you've been in the past. So she's 23 when she gives birth. She's an ice skater, so they're in those little outfits.
Yes.
How did she pull this off? Did any of her skating coworkers know? Was she all by herself?
The only person who I believe knew was her then partner, a man named Teddy Roman. And I sense that there was a very close relationship there, which never blossomed into anything more than a confidant. She was skating with an organization called the Ice Follies up through the early part of January of 1948. And then knowing that she was pregnant and not wanting to reveal that to anybody, she made an excuse to the management that, she had seen her doctor and the doctor said she was just totally exhausted, needed to take time off. And my mother left the show and sequestered herself in a sublet apartment in New York City, where she essentially managed her pregnancy and subsequently managed the adoption with the help only of her oldest sister and her sister's husband. Nobody else in the family ever knew.
Were you ever able to contact her siblings? Oh, wait, we have to first and foremost tell us your mom's name. It's a beautiful name. Your biological mom.
Yes, my biological mom was Genevieve. And her birth name was Genevieve Narowski, which Polish family from New York City. She found herself out on the West Coast, and on her first tour and performance, it was recommended she adopt a stage name, so she changed her name to Genevieve Norris. And later on, several years after I was born, married and became Genevieve Meza.
I don't want to give away everything in the book because I think it would be wonderful for people to read it, and not only people who are interested in ice skating or in, the process of adoption, but there's like little breadcrumbs that were left that you were able to pick up and trace. I know that you found some information about her that they referred to her as an artista, and you've done a wonderful job as a detective tying all these pieces together. You were also, I believe, named after one of her close friends. Is that true, that was involved?
It was a mutual acquaintance or an acquaintance of her brother-in-law and an acquaintance of my future adoptive parents. And, it was one of those things where the person in the middle was just, he came from a common workplace. He was a very, very well-known hairdresser in the movie industry. Genevieve's brother-in-law was involved in the movie industry doing training in commercial type films. My adoptive parents were both in the Signal Corps during World War II. And while their paths never crossed with the brother-in-law, both the brother-in-laws and my parents' paths crossed with this one central figure, a man by the name of Eddie Sens. And what I imagine happening was one day Charles, the brother-in-law, made mention of the fact that he knew somebody who was about to have a child and was seeking an adoptive family. And at the same time, Eddie Sens, the person in the middle, knew that my adoptive parents were looking for a similar situation, and saying nothing, he kind of went and he found out that both parties might have common interests. Obviously they did. And eventually Genevieve came to meet with him. She kind of laid out what she wanted for me or wanted from adoptive parents. And he was the one who, in the end, put it all together.
Did Genevieve ever meet Nina?
I would think not. There's no evidence to that fact, and I don't think so. I think once the adoption was complete, I think Genevieve, in respect to my parents, and I suppose in respect to me, as far as making this a complete process, just basically stepped away. And I'm sure that had to be a terribly painful thing.
Yeah, you make reference to the pain. I forget exactly how you mentioned it, but the having to carry that pain and or longing, right, as a mom who's given up her baby for the rest of her life.
Yeah, you mentioned a sequel, and that's what I'm working on now. And when I went into this discovery process, or this journey to find Genevieve and her identity, if you had asked me about adoption, I would have sort of treated it as an event. It's just something somebody does and then they move on with their life.
It's
And the
not.
more I journeyed into this, I realized that there's pain entering the process, there's pain during the process, and it doesn't go away afterwards. And I've interviewed a number of women since who have given up children, in that era from the late 40s up through the mid 1960s. They called it the baby scoop era. And all of them, to the woman, just basically told me the same story about, afterwards what they went through, and that child was never forgotten.
My mind is like, ooh, all over the place because I have so many questions that I want to ask. When it comes to describing, if you could give me words how you interpret the kind of type of character that Genevieve had, and words that can describe Nina, your adoptive mom.
Yeah, Genevieve, I think, was an extremely focused young woman. She decided at a young age she would be an ice skating performer, and lo and behold, by the time I was conceived, she was starting to reach the pinnacle of her career. And after I was born, she returned to skating and resumed that career. My discoveries afterwards in dealing with people and talking with people who had known her, as she was so well regarded, just as a person, and for her kindness and her interest in others. I could say almost the same things for my mother, Nina. I was thinking this morning as I was out walking about them that they were physically very much alike. They were both extremely artistic. And if you put them side by side, my Nina could have been Genevieve's older sister.
Wow.
That's how alike they were. And so I was terribly fortunate in this process. Genevieve, with her focus, knew precisely what she wanted what she wanted my adoptive parents to, quote unquote, look like in terms of what they could offer me. And she had kind of a punch list, and lo and behold, Nina and my adoptive dad punched every one of those buttons.
Wow. It's like, her punch list. Check, got great big hearts, personality, loving and caring.
Yeah, wow. One of the things which I think was very important to Genevieve, she came from, as I said, a conservative Roman Catholic family. Number one on that list is she wanted me baptized. And my adoptive parents had been married. They had eloped and married in 1937. And remember, I was born in 1948. But, I found their marriage certificate. They went back into the church, and probably within 2 weeks after my birth, they were married on the altar of a local church. And the day after that, there's a baptismal certificate saying that they brought me and they had me baptized. And that was, I know my adoptive parents well enough. They probably would not have done that unless they were convinced that it was a very, very important thing.
Oh, and I have the chills. Oh my gosh.
I'm sure it was Genevieve who, Genevieve was the one who said you need to do that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And do you know, had your adoptive parents been looking for some time for a baby? or trying to adopt?
I assume they had. I don't know that for a fact, but my parents were not youngsters at that point. They were both in their 30s. My dad had been born in 1911, and my mother in 1914. So they were mid 30s, and it was time if it was going to happen.
Right. And you're the only sibling.
I
You're
am
the
the
only
only
child.
sibling.
You're the only
Yeah, my
child.
mother was unable to bear children. I've told the story before. I think when I was 7 years old, traveled to Europe, and I remember going to an orphanage with them and asking, why are we going to an orphanage? And they said, well, wouldn't you like a little baby brother or sister? And even at 7 years old, I had things figured out. I said, well, why don't you just make one? And yeah, they were unable. And yeah, and unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, they were not able to adopt again. So I grew up as an only child.
Well, lucky for you. And you had to introduce yourself to a couple of family members that didn't know that you existed?
And yeah, none of my family members knew I existed, and that was probably more important to some than to others. But I learned early on in my search which started in 2017, that Genevieve had passed away in 2014. So I didn't miss by much, but as you said, everything happens for a reason, and I firmly believe that. So I learned that I had two half siblings. Genevieve married in 1955, had one son in 56, and another in 1957. And I managed to track down the older of the two. I learned that the younger had passed away some years before under kind of unfortunate circumstances. And it took some time to track down that one living half sibling. And when I did, he did not resist me or object to what I was telling him. He just could not fathom the possibility. He kept on asking, okay, tell me again, what kind of kin are we?
Yeah, because I mean, to have someone either open an email or a phone call, it would, I would imagine, it would be startling to anyone, right? It would kind of rattle them.
Yeah, and in all recognizing what I put him through, I had thought, if I find Genevieve alive, how will I approach her? How can I give her the option to say, yes, I want to know you or to be part of your life? Or how do I let her gracefully say, that's a different part of my life that I don't want? But I gave that great thought. I gave no thought to how I'll introduce myself to him once I'd found out Genevieve was no longer alive. So I just kind of banged through the door and said, here I am.
Oh my gosh. He's probably still rattled and shaken. I guess with a story like this, I mean, you had so many years of research already, so I can totally understand how you were ready to just say, hi, here I am. But you must have gone through a period of this hunger to unravel the pieces in the beginning, constantly thinking day in, day out, who, what, when, where, why. But when do you come to peace with enough of your information? It seems like you are.
Oh, I'm very much at peace with it now. There are still details I would like to know more about, and they're little things. It's just sort of the icing on the cake. But I've come to terms with what the circumstances were. I've come to the point where I'm exceptionally grateful to the sacrifice that she made and the decision she came to, and very, 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 very sympathetic to what she must have experienced, not only at the point where she made that decision, but for years afterwards.
A longing to find out and hope and pray that her baby is in the right hands, right?
Yeah, that's as much as I would love to have met her and laughed and had a cocktail with her, the number one reason that I would have loved to have met her was to say, you made a difficult decision. and it worked out better than you had ever dreamed.
Wow. Well, let's hope that that same sentiment can help hundreds of thousands of other kids that have been surrendered for adoption, as you so warmly stated in your book. So it's Nina, and who was your adoptive dad?
His name was James. Actually, his birth name was Ciro, and his middle name was James. Everybody called him Jim or Jimmy.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a good relationship with him as well?
Yeah, he was different. My mother was very, very warm and nurturing. He was kind of the structure person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he came from a very strict immigrant Italian family. And I suspect if he walked in the door 5 minutes too late, he got knocked on his butt as he came through the door. So,
oh dear.
So yeah, he never did that to me. But yeah, he was strict, and he was demanding. And my mother was kind of the opposite of that. She was not a pushover, but she was the warm and real nurturing person.
Did Nina work, or she stayed home with you?
Nina stayed home until I was about 5th grade. And I think that, again, was one of the things that Genevieve wanted for me, was a household where the mother stayed home. And around the time I went to 5th grade, she began working for friends of the family who were actually Academy Award-winning animators. And she worked for them off and on for years afterwards.
Producing or coordinating or
doing animation.
She was an animator.
Painting.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
she was an animator.
And Genevieve was a brilliant artist. So as I said, they both had this artistic streak.
Wow!
I left this morning thinking, I've got a photograph of Genevieve up at the top of a very high ladder, setting up some props at an event down in Georgia, and I have a very distinct memory of my mother, Nina, at the top of a very high ladder, pulling ivy off the front of her house in New York City.
Oh my gosh, there's some divine intervention going on here. You're a lucky guy, Edward de Gangi.
Yes.
It's really wonderful. Sorry to interrupt. We're just going to, in the time we have left, got any last minute tidbits?
Again, little coincidences. Genevieve, as she grew up in Astoria, Queens, and just outside Manhattan, used to roller skate with Tony Bennett. My mother grew up out on Long Island and grew up with Bob Keeshan, who ultimately became Captain Kangaroo. So they both had they both crossed paths with celebrities of sorts. And, so it's something I only thought about this morning.
You're very, very fortunate. And again, the book is called The Gift Best Given, and you can find more information, DiGangi.author.com. And it's spelled DiGangi, author.com. Edward, or Ed, thank you so much for sharing this story. It's really important, and it's magical, and it's positive, and I'm sure that everyone that reads it will get a lot out of it.
Well, I love sharing the story with you, and I do hope there'll be those who read it and find the same joy in reading.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.